hidden inside of storytelling are some invisible ways to create connection. How did I first experience that? 1970, November, a rainy Tuesday. I was sitting in my parked car, trying to gather up enough courage to go into my job yet another day. I was a first-year teacher of young teens with behavior problems, and I had wanted to be the adult ally that they always never had. But all I saw from them was the crossed arms, scowling faces. I tried everything I could think of week after week. By this day in November, I'd given up. I'd even started coming in to work a little later every day. And this day, I was so late. The teachers would already be in their classrooms, the other teachers. They wouldn't even notice when I came in. That did it. I got out of the car, went running through the rain, drops beating on my head. I opened the big wooden door to the school, and there were all 5 of the other teachers. So much for stealth entry. I said, "What?" "Doug, the assistant principal is out sick." "No." You see, the assistant principal was the one who on rainy days would cram all 70 teens into one room, keep them busy until classes could start by telling them stories. "Are they in there?" "Yes, do something." I heard a recording of a folk tale the other day. Maybe I could tell that." "Yes." They shoved me in the room, closed the door behind me, and there I was. The only adult in a room with 70 angry teens. I said, "I'm going to tell you a story." And they gave me a look like, "It better be a good one like the assistant principal tells." Could I even remember this story? Okay, there were 3 basic episodes. I could sort of remember the beginning. They're looking at me. I've got to start. Jack and his mother were having a hard time. And Jack had to go out into the world alone to find his own fortune. When I got that far, I looked at them, and they had shifted from this to this. Their arms had loosened just a little. Their eyes had rolled up just a little. It was a tiny change, but after 2 months of no change, it was like the angels were singing, "Hallelujah." I was encouraged, so I kept telling the story. And as I told it, I realized in the story, the teens were on Jack's side. I was on Jack's side. In the story, we were on the same side. When the story was over, they tightened up again, but it was too late. I'd already glimpsed what it could be like to be connected to them. So I went back to trying to be on their side. 3 months later, a day in February, I looked around my little classroom, and there they were, working happily together in teams of 2 and 3. And I thought, they did it. And now, all these decades later, I think back to that rainy Tuesday in November, and I think, the story did it. It certainly changed my life. I mean, it exposed me to this force that was so powerful. I felt compelled to master it, to understand it, to teach it. So what had I done on that rainy Tuesday? Looking back, I believe that unknowingly, I used 3 strategies for creating connection that are built into the very process of storytelling. And to explain the first strategy, I need to ask you a question. You remember the teens in the room? Well, in your mind, how were they arranged? Raise your hand if in your mind they were seated at desks. Raise your hand if in your mind they were sitting, standing randomly around the room. Raise your hand if you have any image in your mind of how they were arranged, whether you raised your hand before or not. You might not have had visual images. You might have imagined sounds, auditory images, or feelings in your gut, kinesthetic images. But the key thing to notice is I didn't say a word about how they were arranged in the room. I told you that there were 70 of them and they were crammed in, and I showed you how they looked. But every single thing that you and any one of you imagined, in addition to those things, is something that you created purely in your own mind. In other words, each of you was a co-creator of the story that you imagined. Well, it turns out that people are more likely to connect with you if you don't treat them as passive recipients, but as active participants, as co-creators. And that's the first strategy for creating connection that's built in to the very process of storytelling. How do you do that? How do you treat someone as a co-creator? Well, for starters, you focus less on saying the right thing, and you focus more on stimulating your listeners to imagine. What's the second strategy? Well, we know from research that if you engage people in what I call concept mode or idea mode, calculating, evaluating, following logic, then those people are more likely to be focused, but less likely to be open or to be generous. But if you engage those same people in image mode, imagining, associating, they're more likely to be open, to be generous, and to respond with empathy. So when I told that story to the teens, it put them into image mode. And that made it easier for them to care about Jack. And to be open enough to me to engage in my story. So if the second strategy is to engage people in image mode, how is that different from the first strategy, co-creation? Suppose I ask you to solve a math problem. Well, you'll be in concept mode, and you won't be creating. But if I help you create your own math problem, you'll still be in concept mode, but you will also be in co-creation mode. If I ask you to make an exact drawing copying my drawing, you'll be in image mode, and you won't be creating. But storytelling has the amazing ability to combine the image mode strategy with the co-creation strategy by helping your listeners create their own images. So how do you do that? How do you engage people in image mode? One important way is to be in image mode yourself. So that means imagining, experiencing every moment of your story in your eyes or your ears or your gut or your skin, in your whole body. So for the third strategy, I need to bring you back to those teens. Remember I started the story and they loosened up a little bit? Let's break that down. I said some words, Jack and his mother and all that. And in response to that, they loosened up a little bit. And then in response to their loosening, I got encouraged. And then in response to my encouragement, they got more engaged in the story. And so we had begun a cycle of responding to each other's responses. And every time that cycle went around, it knit us a little more tightly together. The best word I have to describe that cycle is rapport. I mean, literally, rapport is a feeling of mutual understanding that I believe can be increased and even induced by this kind of mutual responsiveness. It's worth noticing that you can practice imagining by yourself, but you can't practice building rapport by yourself. So how do you practice it? Suppose you're at dinner with a bunch of your friends, and one of them says to you, "Hey, how was that 2-week vacation of yours?" Here's what you do not say. You don't say, "Oh, excuse me, I'll need a few minutes. I have to write it all down and then memorize it." No, nobody says that. What do? Well, you pull up your memories of the vacation. You remember. You re-embody them. And then you start to talk. And maybe you say, "Oh, so we went to Baja." And then maybe consciously, maybe unconsciously, you notice that one of your friends has a puzzled look. That's not the response you want. So you try to fix it. The Baja Peninsula is part of Mexico. And if your friend smiles now, then you've done two things. First, you've gotten the response that you want. And second, if you tell that same story again later, you'll likely include that same fix in the first place. So that if you keep telling a story to people, eventually every part of that story is something that has worked. So the whole story becomes a sequence of successful interactions. And in the process, you've been practicing getting the response you want, but you've also been practicing mending any breaks in the cycle of rapport. Something else about rapport. To get deep rapport, you need to be open. If you try to hide something important, maybe an emotion you're having, your listeners are likely, consciously or not, to sense that, to stop responding to you quite so readily, to unsync with you. So the price you pay for deep rapport is always some degree of vulnerability. And what you get in exchange for that trusting of your listeners is some of what we most deeply desire from each other: meaningful connection. So the third strategy for building connection is building rapport. And I've already told you some ways that you can do that. First, you can respond to your listeners' responses. That makes you kind of like a bicycle rider, continually adjusting your steering in order to stay on course. And you can shape a story, build a story, by letting your listeners' responses help shape it. And to do that, you may need helping listeners, people who agree to listen to a story in progress as a favor to you. And you can be open. Open to yourself, open to your listeners, open to whatever feelings the story brings up in you. All those decades ago on that rainy Tuesday, I had no idea I was treating those teens like co-creators. I had no idea I was engaging them in image mode to make them more open. I had no idea I was helping to build a cycle of rapport. And I certainly had no idea that I was engaging in a mode of communication, storytelling, that has all three of those connection-building strategies built into it. But I did notice the results. I noticed those first drops of connection seeping through the cracks in the concrete walls of those teens' resistance. At first they're loosening, then their eyes forgetting for the moment to glare, focused instead on their own images of leaving home. And then months later, working in teams with open postures, all of us smiling. And those drops of connection gave me the courage to keep at it for the additional months that it would take until we could swim together in flowing streams of connection.